next week. Good. This week we are actually going to read line for line, more or less, 3 chapters in the Moreh Nevukhim about prophecy. So it'll be a little heavy, but next week in Yirtzeh Hashem it'll be a little lighter. So we'll try and balance between the two. So I'm now going to switch into share screen. I suggest that everybody mutes themselves, or Yael, you mute everybody. You can always unmute. So let's go into share screen.
Still read Ibn Tibon?
We are reading Ibn Tibon. I know, but there we are. Life is hard. It's not a garden of roses. Yitbaeli. Rambam says it has become clear to me. Now again, you've got to realize what's going on here. When Rambam starts by saying this is clear to me, he's giving you a big hint that this is clear to me, but not necessarily to anybody else. And I'm going to tell you something that might be a little bit shocking. Okay? So you have to be very careful. Well, you can, if you want to, pick up his niceties of language. Shebamamad Har Sinai lo haya kol hamagia leMoshe magia lechol Yisrael. This really bounces off what we said last time. Don't think that at Har Sinai, everything that Moshe received and understood, all Israel did. No way. Aval hadibur leMoshe levado. Rambam makes an important distinction, which is really well borne out if you read the chapters. Dibur, only to Moshe. The rest of the people, they heard a noise, a kol, kuf vav lamed. Dibur is intellect, is speech that means something, that conveys ideas. Kol is noise, it's an impression. So the Aseret HaDibrot are all in the singular. Lo tignov, kabed et avicha, shamor et yom HaShabbat, v'alav hashalom yarad letachtit hahar. Now, Moshe went to the bottom of the mountain, vayaged livnei adam ma sheshaman, told people what he'd heard. The mountain is not only a physical mountain, of course, it is an intellectual, spiritual mountain. Amra Torah, Anochi omed ben Hashem u'benechem ba'et hahi lagid lachem et devar Hashem. The Torah says that Moshe says, I stood between God and you at that time to tell you devar Hashem. I know devar, the word of the Lord. You, a cacophony, thunder, lightning, sound of the shofar. That's all you experienced. Now, we said that in the shofarot, remember? Not such a long time ago on Rosh Hashanah. How did you understand that phrase? Moshe yidaber v'haElohim yanenu b'kol. And isn't the order wrong? We've just said that Moshe took the word of God down to Bnei Israel, so it should have said, haElohim yidaber v'Moshe yanenu b'kol Moshe yidaber. So when you were davening Shemona Esrei, Amida, on Rosh Hashanah, how did you understand that? Did you even ask yourself a question? Anybody want to suggest an answer in 3 seconds? 1, 2, 3. Your time is up. No answer. Rashi says, noting the difficulty here, Moshe yidaber. Moshe explained to the people what he heard from God on the top of the mountain. Comes down to the bottom, uses dibur, because they'll understand. They won't just be overwhelmed by these tremendous noises. But can a human being speak to a huge group of people? Elohim yanenu v'kol, God comes back with his big Charlton Heston voice, lahavdil elef abdalot, and he amplifies what Moshe was saying to the people. So God becomes Moshe's amplifier. Look at Rashi. Okay? Uvebeur amro b'mechilta, and Rambam knows everything, so he pulls out a mechilta midrash halacha, ki kol dibur v'dibur, haya mishivo lahem kemo sheshama, וכתוב בתורה גם כן, בעבור ישמעם בדברי עמך, מורה כי הדיבור היה לו, והם ישמעו הקול ההוא העצום. They heard God's huge voice. Moshe understood, brought the message down, spoke to the people, and suddenly it was amplified in a huge acoustic mega fashion so that they could hear what Moshe was actually saying. Lo hevdel hadvarim. But what the people didn't understand from God's communication with them was dvarim, ideas, rational concepts, commandments even. They did not understand a thing. They were in the grip of some huge light and sound show that terrified them out of their wits. They say, Lama namut, okay, we're going to die. And this was a one-time event. So God chose to impress them at the time of the Torah. But the only person who understood what God had planned for his people was Moshe, and he was entrusted with the task of communication, beginning with the Dibrot on Har Sinai, right through 40 years of constant teaching and instruction. Only Moshe knew. So davar, Homo sapiens, understanding the word dibur, only Moshe. The rest of the people, and Rambam never had a very high opinion of the generation came out of Egypt. He's not a chassid. He's not a devotee of crowd events. Doesn't think that it actually makes any difference if you're not intellectually, morally, spiritually prepared. And number two, he does talk about the generation that came out of Egypt as possessing a slave mentality. Therefore, God had to compromise with them in all sorts of areas. We may get to that when we discuss the korbanot, or the sacrifices in Tamei HaMitzvot. V'al shem line 8, hakol ahu hatzum amar k'shomachem et hakol. And this is why the people are hearing a call, a noise, a sound. V'amar kol dvarim atem shomim utmona enichem roim zulati kol. Moshe says, all you heard and saw, okay, was a voice. V'lo amar dvarim atem shomim. You never heard any dibur. We talk about Aseret HaDibrot, but only Moshe had a dibur. Moshe hu asher yishma dvarim v'yisaprem lahem. Moshe heard and told. Zeu anireh min haTorah u'mirob divrei hachachamim zal. This is Torah and Chazal. Ela sheyesh lahem gam ken ma'amar katuv b'arbei mekomot min hamidrashot u'batalmud gam ken hu omram anochi v'lo yelecha mipi hagvura sham'um. Now, what's the fly in the ointment, says the Rambam? We have a tradition that the first two Dibrot, I'm the Lord your God, and you shall have no other gods beside me, and not worship idols. Well, that was told to the people. And it was the other 8 commandments that Moshe had to communicate with them. Okay? So, Mipi Gvura Sham'um is very clear. They heard it directly from the mouth of God. Now, it doesn't say that they understood. It says they heard. רוצים בזה שהם הגיעו עליהם כמו שהגיעו למשה רבינו, ולא היה משה רבינו מגיעים עליהם. So the communication of the first 2 commandments with the people was as understandable as Moshe hearing them from God. The reason is ששני אלו השורשים רצוני לומר מציאות האלוה בהיותו אחד, אומנם יושגו בעיון האנושי. וכל מה שיוודע במופת משפט הנביא בו ומשפט כל מי שידעהו שווה אין יתרון. And whatever can be understood by human speculation at a fairly basic level doesn't need prophecy. So Moshe's excellence was needed for 8 commandments, not for the first 2. Now, if I was telling this to you today, you'd probably be surprised. You'd say, what? Simplistic Bnei Israel understood that God existed and you mustn't worship any other gods and make them gods, but they didn't understand Shabbat, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie on the witness stand, don't covet. We, of course, are a different generation. For us, the question mark is about the existence of God. But in Rambam's time, nobody did not believe that God existed. The only issue they had was how to prove that he existed. And therefore, we have a lot of chapters in the Moreh Nevukhim we're not going to read about the proof for God's existence. I will not bore you with the details of the Kalam, St. Anselm, Thomas Aquinas, the ontological proof, the cosmological proof. But everybody believed in God. And as far as Rambam is concerned, you don't need to be a great philosopher to understand that that's true. You will argue about how you prove he existed. And most of the scholastic philosophy of the Middle Ages was concerned with that question. But not, did God exist? We have to wait a long time for Nietzsche and God is dead. Okay? It's not now when Rambam was writing in 1191. So he's prepared to say that the first two commandments were understandable, but all the rest, and now you will say to me, but we all know about thou shalt not kill. Not so simple. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. You need a prophet, and I hope that this will be clear, if you think about it, to tell us the details of the 8 commandments. Shabbat, certainly, Kibud Av Va'em, certainly killing, because you can kill, as we know, in all sorts of situations which are actually not the right ones. Stealing, you can steal in the name of God. You can commit adultery in the name of a higher being. How many spiritual males have taken advantage of this concept to lead immoral lives? You can even say it's a mitzvah bar baveras, Shabtai Tzvi did, and Jacob Frank. And the lying on the stand, and of course, fact, Reb Isaac Harif once said, in something that we're talking about now, it says, V'chol ha'am ro'im et hakolot, and all the people saw the sounds. So we ask a question, what do you mean they saw the sounds? Well, it could be that the verbs in the pasuk are interchangeable. They're hearing, they're seeing. There was, after all, thunder, which you hear, lightning, which you see, and the sound of the shofar. You can solve that. But Reb Isaac Harif said, God wanted to write up in skywriting the commandment of lo tignov, don't steal. Because many people, when they would have heard lo tignov only, would have heard lamed vav tignov. You can steal for the sake of God. So God wrote it up in skywriting, lamed aleph, do not steal ever. So what I'm planting in your heads is this idea that when Rambam approaches this question of the first 2 commandments, or everybody heard and understood, this didn't need a prophetic intermediary. Moshe was not necessary for that. But for the rest, he certainly was. And I'm inverting what we might regard as a modern approach, which would have said, well, we all know not to steal and not to kill and not to lie. But of course, I can ask you very pointedly, do we really? And I'm going to leave you with that question mark. But this is the point that Rambam makes in this sentence here. Okay, I'm beginning on line 14. ששני אלו השורשים רצוני לומר, מציאות האלוה והיותו אחד, אומנם יושגו בעיון האנושי. Anybody will understand that that's true. וכל מה שיוודע במופת משפט הנביא, ומשפט כל מי שידעהו שווה אין יתרון. ולא נולדו שני השורשים האלה מצד הנבואה לבד, and you didn't need a prophet to communicate these two. לכן אמרה התורה, אתה הוראת לדעת. You have seen and you begin to understand, כי השם הוא האלוהים, ואין עוד מלבדו. As we're going to sing out on שמיני עצרת שמחת תורה, אתה הוראת לדעת. You as a people, you saw, experienced the pyrotechnics on Sinai, and you understood ladat, Hashem hu Elohim ve'en od milva. The first 2 commandments are amenable, as far as the Rambam is concerned, to very simple human understanding. The rest are much more complicated, and they need a prophetic intermediary. Omnam, Shara Dibrot, 16, at the end, Hem mikat hamufursamot, v'hamukubalot lo mikat hamuskalot. This again is a term of art in Jewish medieval philosophy, theology. There are things that are wisdoms that need to be explained, finessed, and communicated in a legal fashion, with imagination and with political sense. That needs a prophet. So Moshe spells these out when he gets down and right through the 40 years, how we are to fulfill the 8 commandments. And it's very clear by the way the people understood, because God punished the Israelites for the golden calf. For the golden calf. That was something that they should have understood, and they did. So nothing more said about that. ואחרי שמוע הקול ההוא הראשון, היאמר שנזכר מראתם מן העניין ופחדם הגדול. But after that, after the first 2 commandments, all the rest is shrouded in fear. Then the Torah starts talking about how the people were afraid, and they say to Moshe, Ata lama namut, karavata ushama. You have to listen on our behalf. We cannot take the noise and the light, Ubahu nanichbad mikol nolad. That's a nice line. Line 19, 3 words from the end. Ubahu hanichbad mikol nolad. What does that phrase mean? And he who is more honorable than any born person, Moshe Rabbeinu, Shenit, v'kibel shara dibrot, achat achat yarad lamata lahar v'yashmeim otam. The 8 commandments, the people are too scared. They cannot hear him, cannot hear God's voice. They cannot understand. So that has to be communicated by Moshe. והם ראו האש וישמעו הקולות, רצוני לומר, הקולות אשר הם קולות וברקים, וקול שופר חזק מאוד כמו שאמר, כל הערים רואה את הקולות, as we said on ראש השנה, עמידה, שופרות ורעמים, אמנם קול השם. רצוני לומר, קול השם ממנו הובן הדיבור, לא שמעו אלא פעם אחת לבד, כמו שאמרה התורה, כמו שביארו חכמים במקום אשר הראיתיך עליו, it says that they almost died when they heard this noise. Only. Now I've bolded this. V'da. According to what we said now, the people would have heard the first 2 commandments, God's existence, his unity, and the prohibition on idolatry, and would have understood. The rest, no understanding, only an oppression which terrified them. Great sound, great noise. Now he says something that's rather confusing. The the bold bit in line 25. Sheza kol gam ken el madregatam bo shaveh im madregat Moshe Rabbeinu. They weren't really up to the standard of Moshe Rabbeinu, even in relation to the first 2 commandments, which were meant to be understood by anybody and everybody in the Middle Ages, certainly, and the Rambam works back, I guess, to the revelation on Mount Sinai, but he seems to be contradicting what he said. He seems to have said that the first 2 commandments were understood by all the people just in the same way that Moshe understood them. But now he says, no. Remember, we started by saying that Rambam, in his book, tells you he's going to contradict himself. Well, here's a contradiction for you. What does he mean? Were the people the same level of Moshe in relation to the first 2 commandments, or were they not? He says, davar behipucho. They were, and then he says, well, actually, not quite. They weren't up to Moshe's standard. ואנוכי אעירך על זה הסוד והודיעך שהוא עניין מקובל, שכל מקום שתמצא וידבר השם למשה. We're going to skip that, and we're going to finish this by starting from V'da'ehu. Line 30, 4th word along. V'da'ehu v'zochrehu. Now I want you again, he points out that you've got to be very particular on this point. Now I'm going to shroud this in mystery. You cannot go into Mamad Har Sinai more than I have done. Rambam was not lacking self-confidence. But we really don't understand at the end of the day. Never has there been anything like it. Never will there be. I know this. As the Torah says, Hashama am kol Elohim midaber mitoch ha'esh v'chai. Has a people ever heard God's noise, the call, the acoustic grandeur coming out of a fire and lived? By the way, this is also a dig at Christianity and Islam. Rambam has to be very careful because his book is in Arabic. It's going to be read by more than one Gentile. So he clothes it in theological Jewish terms, and of course he's knocking Christianity and Islam. They claim to a revelation after the Torah is absolutely false. It's just perhaps curious to note that, of course, both Christianity and Islam claim they are continuing what was given on Mount Sinai. They are simply doing what they ought to do, and they were hinted at in the Torah. And we stubborn Jews simply didn't take the hint. I'll just perhaps give you some of the Islamic midrashim. How do the Muslims know that Muhammad is the true prophet coming after the Torah and there to complete it? Well, Torah says, Navi akim lahem mikerev achehem. Remember, I'll set you up a prophet from the midst of your brethren. Who are the brothers of the Jewish people? Ishmael, the brother of Yitzhak. So therefore, God says, I'm going to send you a prophet who's called Ishmael. Hofia mehar paran. We're going to read this in Shemini Atzeret Simchat Torah. God appeared from Mount Paran. Well, what does it say? It says, Hashem misinai ba, v'zarach miseir lamo, hofia mehar paran. God did come down on Sinai. Then Seir. Seir is Edom. Edom is Christianity. And what comes last? Hilchataka Batrai. Who is associated with Midbar Paran? Who became an archer in Midbar Paran? Ishmael. Okay, so he clearly is hinted at as the last, most perfect completion of the Torah. And Muslim theologians even have a gematria. You want to hear it? Well, I'm going to tell you it anyhow. What's the gematria of Muhammad? Quickly. Mem Chet Mem Daled. 92. Very good. You're all very slow tonight. It is Muhammad. There's no vav in Arabic. 92 is the gematria of Vihifreti Oto. It says then Bim'od Ma'od. That's what God blessed Ishmael. Bim'od Ma'od. What's the gematria of very much? Bim'od Ma'od. 92. Anyhow, just food for thought. Okay? So, we're not the only ones who can interpret the Torah. Now I'm going to move on to a question that Rambam asked, and we'll examine the term malach, angels. Now, you undoubtedly are in the grip of little white creatures with flapping wings, with a halo, without a halo, a malach, okay, flying around the world, sometimes taking on human form. Hukshali bezeh haperek devarim. Rishona, ma'adat asher shov hara binyan. Sorry, before I go there, I want to cite Abarbanel. This is Abarbanel. Abarbanel, famous Abarbanel, wrote a very lengthy commentary on Moreh Nevukhim. Every page of Ibn Tibbon's translation in the classical printed edition has 10 lines of Rambam and 56 lines of Abarbanel. It has another commentary, Shem Tov and Afudi. They're all quite short. Abarbanel wrote masses of reams of paper okay, about the Moreh Nevukhim. And here he has a problem. He says, "Hukshali b'zeh perek dvarim." I got a problem with this chapter. Rishona ma'u adata she'achshov hara b'inyan hakol sheshmu bar Sinai. Okay, so what is he's the Rav? For Abarbanel, Rambam is the Rav. Okay, he says, what does he really think about what the people heard? On the one hand, he seems to imply that the people heard, at least for the 8 commandments, just a huge noise that terrified them out of their wits. Well, how did Moshe hear something different? God spoke or sounded one sound. How did that happen? Are we talking about some type of intellectual process? Now, Narboni, Rabbi Moshe Narboni, wrote a commentary on the Moreh Nevukhim as well, but he was an ultra-rationalist, follower of Aristotle, Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd, and he was vilified by Abarbanel as being a heretic, far too rational for Abarbanel's taste and for that of Rabbi Kappa. But the Rogachover actually said that he liked him, which is interesting. The same Rogachover gave smicha to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, or the other smicha the Lubavitcher got was from Rabbi Dr. Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg when he was in Berlin at the Hildesheimer. En hanuvua davar tivi tistarech el hakanot hakodmot. Abarbanel disagrees with Rambam. He says, no, at Har Sinai, everybody rose to the level close to that of a prophet. That's why they had to prepare themselves. Abarbanel goes for will and not for wisdom. God willed that Bnei Israel at Har Sinai should rise up to a very high level. Why did the people have to wash their clothes, separate from women? Isn't that a sign of rising in spiritual status? If all the people heard was a huge noise, didn't understand intellectually anything, so why did God have to add his loud voice to the shofar and the thunder? That was there. Wasn't that enough? God said, I want the people to hear when I speak to you. So God had to make a sound or make communication with Moshe, because that will make them believe in you forever, because they know that you are in communication with God. But if it was just a big noise, the people could have said, Moshe had placed on the top of the mountain a huge stereo system that hadn't been invented for several thousand years, but Moshe was a very smart guy, and he had it there, and that produced this tremendous call that terrified them all. It's just a noise that you can make. Moshe's inventing all of this. Where's that phrase from? In the Torah. And what does it mean? Anybody out there? Dakot ushudufot kadim.
The 7 years.
Exactly. Thank you, Bernard. The 7 ears of wheat that Pharaoh, dreamed about, they were thin and blasted by the east wind. In other words, Rambam is talking rubbish. And this is rare for Abarbanel to be critical. And what I'm trying to say, that whilst Rambam has a system and he makes everything a matter of wisdom, almost everything, in fact, everything is wisdom, Abarbanel cannot shake off the feeling that we would be missing something very important if we don't believe that at Har Sinai, most of the Jewish people rose up in their spiritual and intellectual level and were influenced by something more than merely a big noise. And Rambam himself is not clear. He says the people understood the first two dibrot, but not quite like Moshe. So he's skating on thin ice. What does he mean? What does he really believe? Does he really believe that the people understood nothing? Or does he believe that the people understood something, but at a very low level compared to Moshe? This is, again, as I said to Yael at the very beginning, and you like the phrase, we have to connect the dots. So I'm leaving you to connect the dots because I could not possibly reveal more than what the Rambam writes. Could I now? Okay, so having said that, let's go to line 3 on page 2. Now, in the aftermath of the Aseret HaDibrot and golden calf, etc., God says to Moshe, I'm going to send an angel before you. Or says to Bnei Israel, Hinei anochi sholeach malach. Okay? Lefanecha. What does he mean by that? Inyano hu ma shitpaer b'mishneh Torah, shaloa amar Moshe b'mamad har Sinai, navi akim lahem. God says to Moshe that navi akim lahem at Har Sinai, okay, as it's recorded in Dvarim, v'natati dvari befiv, v'diber alehem et kol asher atzavenu. Who is the malach, the angel, who is going to tell the people what they need to do? This is a Navi. A Navi, in other words, this is Moshe Rabbeinu. The angel of the malach is Moshe. Varayal ze amaro b'zeh hamalach, hishame mipanav u'shma b'kolo. Now, God says, you have to obey the angel and listen to his voice. En safek shezot ha-mitzvah hi lehamon b'nei hadam. Everybody is commanded, Bnei Israel, as a mass. V'hamon b'nei adam lo yira lehem malach v'lo yitzavem lo yisireim ad shitztavu shelo yimaruhu. But can we, regular people, see angels, experience angels? Well, according to Rambam, the answer is absolutely not. Who sees angels in their dreams? Prophets, not us. Now, you might say, well, Hagar saw an angel that showed her where the well of water was. Or we could say, Eshet Manoach, remember Samson's mother. Well, Rambam says elsewhere, and as I have told you more than once, as he himself said, I'm going to give you different bits of the picture in different chapters. He talks about the levels of prophecy, and there he says you can have a very low level in which you might see a manifestation of an angel in human form. But basically angels, such as the prophets see, Zechariah, Yeshayahu, these are only in prophetic visions. So why does God say, I'm going to send you a malach and you have to obey him and listen to him when people cannot see a malach and can't hear an angel, okay? Va'omnam, I'm the second word of line 7. Inyan ze ha'ma'amar shu yitbarach hodiem she'akum navi elahem she'yevo'ehu malach yidaber imo yitzaveu v'yasirehu. The angel is inside the prophet. Yes, the angel is inside the prophet and his prophetic imagination, the prophetic muse, the prophetic spirit. The malach is a name for the prophetic talent and force that's inside the prophet. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu is called a malach. Okay? All right. V'hizhiranu aloha mimimrod b'malach ha'asher yagia lanu hanavi devaro kamo sheber b'mishneh Torah v'amar elav tishmon. That's why we can be commanded to obey the prophet and to listen to him. V'amar v'yah ha'isha asher lo yishma divrei what will happen to someone who doesn't listen to a true prophet? What does it say? Finish the pasuk. I'll finish the pasuk. Anochi edrosh me'imo. I will take him to task because you didn't listen to the prophet. The angel is inside the prophet. Who beyur amaroki shmi bikirbo. Rambam has a pasuk. My name is inside that prophet. My influence, my spirit is inside the prophet. ואומנם זה כולו להודיע להם שזה המראה הגדול אשר ראיתם אותו, רצוני לומר, מעמד הר סיני, אינו עניין מתמיד עמכם. You cannot take Har Sinai with you wherever you go. Revelation was a one-time thing. What I am giving you to accompany you throughout your history are prophetic individuals, and then we'll get to the Rambam and the Chazon Ish next week, who are going to communicate with you what their angel, their prophetic spirit is telling them. In fact, I could say, and the Rambam will see this, says this quite soon, the angel is the Koach HaMedameh, that amazing power of imagination coupled with intellect that gives the prophetic excellence to that most perfect of human beings. Okay? There's a difference between Moshe and others, but we'll talk about that next week. Ki shmi b'kirbo. My name is inside him. אומנם זה כולו להודיע להם שזה המראה הגדול אשר ראיתם אותו, צוני לומר מעמד הר סיני, אינו עניין מתמיד עמכם, לא יהיה בעתיד כמותו, ולא יהיה תמיד לא אש ולא ענן, כמו שהוא עתה על המשכן תמיד. You won't have all the fire, the light, and the sound. Again, this is a dig at Christianity and Islam. It's never going to happen again, only once for the Jews. Okay? ואומנם יכבוש לכם הערים. The prophets will conquer cities for you. V'yizamen lahem haaretz. Yoshua will take you into the land. Moshe fought some battles. V'yodiachem ma she'ta'asu. The prophets will tell you what to do and how to live as a nation and as individuals. V'zeh hamalach she'eshlacheu la'neviachem ilamdechem ma she'tzarich la'asot u'ma she'ra'ui lishamer mimenu. The angel is in the prophet. U'vazeh nitan ha'yisod asher lo sarti leva'aro tamid. Now, I've been making this point constantly. V'hu shekol navi bilti Moshe Rabbeinu tuvoehu hanuvua al yidei malach v'da'ehu. The prophetic talent is called an angel, and all the prophets worked off their prophetic talent, which is basically this intellectually driven imagination, except for Moshe, who is pure intellect. A wonderful Aristotelian prophet, only intellect. John.
Alors, what about the Malach of Manoach or the Malach of
I
Lot?
just said the Malach of Manoach or Malach of Hagar are a very low level of prophecy. That's because we haven't dealt with the degrees of prophecy. That's manifest on special occasions. That Malach was something inside Hagar and inside Eshet Manoach. And you have to accept that as a...
No, it was a dream.
Or a dream. In other words, it was in what we call a prophetic mode, which is basically dreamlike. Doesn't have to be a dream, but it's dreamlike because your imagination takes over. But that imagination has been prepared for by the intellect, so you are ready to receive that malach of Nevuah. Now let's have a look at what Rambam has to say about angels in general. Uchvar yadata she'inyan malach shaliach. I'm going back to book 2, chapter 26. Rambam also deals with angels. So I'm going to give you the whole kit and caboodle here, okay? We've done Revelation, now we're doing angels. A lot more to say, but we're only going to skim the guide. Okay, Jack? Am I okay skimming? Thanks. Dankeschön. Okay, we go. Vayadata she'inyan malach shaliach. Rambam says the word malach or angel in Tanakh simply means a force which God has planted inside us and which can be tapped into in the right circumstances. Everything that responds to natural laws is a malach. Animals have an angel inside them, allows them to do the things they do. Lions have a leonine angel. Tigers have a tigerine angel, okay? Every living creature, even a blade of grass or a stone, an inanimate object, has rules and regulations and an angel, as it were. God planted ways of moving, of reacting, of thinking inside every entity in the world. Right. When anything moves in its natural way, this is God's plan, nature, wisdom. And then a movement will happen, a reaction will happen. Angels are not little flighty things with flapping wings going around, or even people mysteriously appearing in your lives and helping you out. All of that, Rambam will tell us, is a childish fantasy. But some religious people like to believe that. Remember, he's talking to the perplexed. Now I'm going to read on. Every morning in the Shacharit prayer, we recite a psalm and we say, Oseh malachav ruchot. His angels are what? What are ruchot? Winds. Misharatav esh lohet. And his servants are heat waves. All these are manifestations of the angels that God has planted within entire nature and universe. Okay? Sometimes you can have a human angel. Okay? Vayomer al hanavi, vayal malach Hashem in hagilgal el habochim. Pasuk in Shoftim. The prophet is called an angel, as Moshe is called an angel. Okay? Hinei anochi sholeach malachi lefanecha. Vayishlach malach vayotzienu mimitzrayim. We say that in the Seder. He sent an angel who took us out of Egypt. Who was the angel? Who was the angel who took us out of Egypt? Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu. He is the angel, driven by his internal angel who appeared to him at the burning bush to vouchsafe the gift of prophecy. Umamod ra ivaron ha-sichlut umama od mazik. Now he says, you know what? People are deliberately blind because of their folly. This, of course, is a typical Maimonidean move. And what is the folly? Ilu amarta li'ish echad me'asher yachshavu shehem chatmei Yisrael. Say, I was to say, Rambam says, to somebody who regards himself as a scholar of Israel, as a rabbi, your local Orthodox rabbi, shall we say. Okay? Sha'Hashem yishlach malacho shikanetz bebeten ha'isha yitzer sham ha'ubar. God sends an angel, it enters the womb of every pregnant woman and looks after the formation of the fetus. There's a Gemara and there's a Midrash that uses that term. There's an angel of the womb, a womb angel. Yitav lo zemaod vikablu. Rambam knows that most of his rabbinical colleagues will be very happy with that. They have no problem with that at all. Okay? This points to God's great wisdom. Okay, and his power. He can send an angel into the womb of every pregnant woman in the world. Now, in fact, he's going into the Midrash, as I've written for you, Bereshit Rabbah. Angels. If you open the Midrash, an angel can be a fiery being. We have Srafim. Okay. And Shiur kishlish haolam kulo, and he's as tall as a third of the world, and etc., etc., etc. Rambam says most of my Orthodox rabbinical colleagues will say, fine, just great, in the 12th century. Or shehatzurot kulam muf'elet. Okay. Omnam, however, im tomarlo שהשם יתברך שם בזרע כוח מייצר. But if you turn to your local Orthodox rabbi and say, no, God inhered the power of developing an embryo into a fetus, and it's within the womb to do that without any external intervention. It is nature that forms the limbs and gives them their appearance. And that is the angel. The rabbis talk about angels who are masters of the world. Yivrach mizeh. Rambam says, most of my colleagues will scream in horror. They will not understand that this is God's greatness, not that he sends a little angel or a big angel, okay, or a fiery angel or a wet angel, okay, to do something, produce a change in the world. No, it's all there, and the angel is simply a term. Now, what that term means, of course, is a lot more than merely a force, because you can have an angel who appears to you in a dream, but that's a much higher level. For most of us, Rambam wants us to believe that the word malach in Jewish theology simply means a force which is somehow sparked off, whether it's by pure nature or by intellect. This is what an angel means. And this accounts for all the phrases. Now, why don't people in his time understand this? Problem is that they cannot see, touch, hear, or feel this. And they want a real angel. We need an angel. We want a malach. But Rambam says you've got to cure yourself of this disease, okay? If you want to be a successfully unperplexed person in his time. All right? So, Kvar Be'aru. Where are we? Every single physical capacity we have is an angel. All the things that happen in the world, according to natural laws, are angels. Then he talks about the fact that angels only do one thing and not other things. We can connect it with the laws of physics if we want, but I'm going to move on to line 39. וכן העניין באמת, כי כל אלו הכוחות האישיות הוות ונפסדות על ההמשך. Okay, and I want to move on to, נשארים ללא יפסידו, ושם נאמר בעניין יהודה ותמר. Now he's got an example here of Yehuda and Tamar. Do you remember the Bible story? What happened in Genesis chapter 38? Somebody start to tell the story of Yehuda and Tamar. Anybody?
Tamar had to Yehuda didn't want that Tamar marries his third son because he was afraid that he would die like the two first. And finally, you know the story that she disguised herself like a harlot.
Exactly.
And then Yehuda himself,
he impregnates her, and they have twins, Peretz and Zerach, and from that house comes David. Okay, so what happened in this confrontation? Yehuda, apparently a great tzaddik, Would he really go off and have intercourse with his daughter-in-law, even though he didn't know? But why should he go and pay for a prostitute anyhow? That's the sort of thing that Yehuda would do. So the Rambam cites the Midrash. V'sham ne'emar binyan Yehuda v'Tamar, beginning of line 40. V'sham ne'emar binyan Yehuda v'Tamar. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, bikesh la'avor. Yehuda was going to pass by the prostitute at the crossroads. I mean, what was he doing with a prostitute? V'zimen lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu malach. God ordered an angel. Shehu ha'mamuneh ala ta'ava. Now, this angel is your libido, is the sex drive. So, what's happened? Now, what is he saying here? Is a little more profound. The malach is clearly Yehuda's sex drive, but something aroused his sex drive in a major way. Now, here we get to this interesting theological point. There are times in history when people do what they think is their natural thing, okay? But they do it in a somewhat either unexpected way or it's part of a divine plan. If you think about the Ish, again, a malach that met Joseph in Shechem and said, your brothers have gone to Dotan. That Ish, okay, is a malach, not because he has wings and flaps them around and has a halo, because he's part of God's plan. So in fact, we work, and this is, of course, Rambam's sophistication, at two levels. Basically, most of the time, we are wisdom. We do the things we do. The angels that are talked about in the Bible and in Chazal are our forces, the forces of nature, psychological forces, things that make us work. Very occasionally, whenever it suits God's plan, one of these forces happens either in a greater measure than normal or at a particularly opportune moment. So the term malach is ambivalent, and perhaps Yehuda attained a slight level of prophecy. The man in the field was at a low level of Ruach HaKodesh, feeling that something needed to be done to help Joseph get to his brothers. Yehuda feeling irresistibly drawn to this prostitute at the crossroads. It can happen. You can explain it. People who are normally sane do unusual things.
Especially men and their libido.
And I have somebody on my left who says especially men and their libidos. But whatever the case, this is, again, the way Rambam so kind of interestingly works in Chazal into his theological matrix. So we have the malach, and he has a lot more to say about angels too. I'm not going to give you the whole angel spiel about when you see angels and when you don't, and what they mean in a dream. But this is, I think, it's just a nice passage that proves the point. When the rabbis talk about the angel who is Mumuneh ala Tava, this is clearly a natural drive, okay? But it happened with much greater force than normal at the right time that Tamar would become pregnant and would produce the line that eventually led to the birth of King David. This is how the Rambam sees many, many passages. This is the Maimonidean approach. Hine kvar kara koach hazeh malach gamken. Ki timsaim tamid omrim malach shu mumuneh al kach v'kach. Rabbis talk about angels being in charge of. There's an angel, as we know, in charge of parnassah, of your living, earning capacity. When you were at Duchening on Rosh Hashanah, did you have an old-fashioned machzor that gives you the names of angels in Birkat Kohanim, all those Ankatam and Fisfastam, and that whole list of Kabbalistic letters and words? I don't know whether you had that, Jean, or you know those
But I
old-fashioned.
remember Rabbi Wiesenberg told me I never say that.
Exactly, a Maimonidean. But I don't know whether, Jack, you do say these lines of angels in the middle of.
I don't say them, but they are also printed in the art scroll Marzal.
There we are. They are in Art Scroll. And
Correct.
that is exactly the Malach HaMamoneh. You turn to the angel who's in charge of your livelihood, of your health, and you hope that if you chant these mystical words, you'll somehow influence that angel to give you a raise at the end of the month, or a clean bill of health, or enable you to marry the woman you want to, apparently is not interested in you at all. This is fantasy. Rambam says this is fantasy, but people like to believe in it. So, if we work hard, we'll earn money. If we look after ourselves, there's a better chance of having good health. These are the angels. And the highest angel of all is the capacity that the best of human beings have to develop into a prophet. The Chatuv Midrash Kohelet, okay, I mean, we're going to skip this now. Let's move on. We have another 3 minutes. Hine Kvar, I'm on the beginning of page 3 in the bold. Hine Kvar bi'aru lemi she'avin v'yaskil. I've already explained to somebody who has understanding and intelligence. This is again Maimonidean classic moves, implying that if you don't accept what he says, you have neither understanding nor intelligence. Shakoach hamadameh gam ken yikarei malach. This is the denouement, okay? The koach hamadameh, that prophetic imagination, when coupled and supported by a first-rate intellect, that is the angel of prophecy that God promised to the Israelites, that this prophet would be there, would lead them, and would guide them, and distill out of that cacophony of sound and light and shofar something that resembles a rational way of life and a good way of life, a moral, ethical, and spiritually uplifting way of life, which of course the Rambam will explain how all of the mitzvot are connected with rational, spiritual, and moral drives and standards. The Shasechel Yikare Kruv, that's intellect is called the cherub, and in the Maaseh Merkavah, in Ezekiel's vision of the chariot, we have the cherub and the angel, and that's again a whole other section of the guide. And how wonderful is this for somebody who has understanding? A bit like the king who has no clothes. Remember the story of the king who was deceived by the tailors, and he was parading around naked, okay? He had no clothes on. But what the tailors had said was that anybody who can't see the clothes is a fool. And nobody would like to admit to being a fool. So Rambam says, whoever knows and understands, has intelligence, all of this is wonderful stuff. But the fools, they don't like it one little bit. Try telling this to your Haredi friends, okay? Okay. The last word, in the last second or two, is that when you see an angel, and when they talk about seeing an angel in the Bible, it all depends upon the level of prophecy at which you are, but you could be at a very low level. So you can see an angel in a prophetic dream. That's a different type of angel, but that angel is a message from God. So that type of angel depends upon on what level you are. So you can have Hagar or Eshet Manoach seeing an angel, but this is a prophetic vision. And that sight is a very low sight. Whereas if you are Isaiah and you see the Lord of God sitting in the Heichal, and there are Srafim Omdim Mima'alo, and there are seraphs above him, etc., that's a much higher level of prophecy, but it's all a matter of prophetic vision. You never see a malach in real life. Okay, I'll stop the screen share. And with a promise that next week we will be a little lighter, okay, because I know that this stuff perhaps is a little exercising fairly late for us in Israel anyhow on a Wednesday evening. But okay, questions, impressions, thoughts? Melanie, you're on.
On what basis is it thought or understood that the first two commandments were heard by all the people from God himself?
This is a rabbinic understanding, but the main basis of the text is that they are in the singular and they are spoken by God. Anochi Hashem Elohecha. I'm the Lord your God. Who is saying that? Must be God. And if it's God, then he's communicating it to the people. Lo yelecha Elohim acherim. God is saying, there shall not be for you. He's speaking. It sounds like direct speech. So the rabbis play off that and say that the first two commandments, mipi hagvura ne'emu, they were said by God. The rest are in the third person, okay? Second person imperative. Kabed et avicha v'et imecha, lo tignov, lo tirtzach. Okay, all second person imperative, whereas the first two seem to be in the first person. Okay,
But why does that imply that the people heard from God?
Well, because well, as I said, it's basically a long rabbinic tradition, and that's what the Rambam is trying to remain faithful to. But
a rabbinic tradition on what basis?
on the basis of, it's an interesting question, on the basis of the difference in terminology, okay, in grammar, but also perhaps the understanding that I tried to present to you during my talk. It would be assumed by the rabbis of the Midrash, as was assumed by Maimonides himself, that the existence of God, Anochi Hashem Elohecha, and not to worship any other gods, would have been understood by the people as a whole without any prophetic training whatsoever. All of that would not have been uncommon in the ancient world. Remember, what was his name? Anahaten, the Pharaoh, who believed in one God and destroyed the rest of the gods. Confucius, Lahavdil, and many other figures, and also the turn of the pagan world away from paganism to monotheism. So I think that that's part of the story behind that. It's clearly not like said anywhere in the Torah that you can say, this is clear. But I think that the rabbis in their Midrash, and it's basically accepted right through the Middle Ages and the early modern period, that these two principles must have been, and the fact that they are said in the first person helps this rabbinic interpretation. But an excellent point, okay? I know it sounds counterintuitive to us because we would say just the opposite, okay? But again, if you really think about it, do we really understand how to apply the principle of you shall not kill? Cain and Abel, well, Cain certainly didn't, okay? Left to his own devices. So what I'm injecting here is a way of looking at the Torah and everything it does in a slightly different way to what we might look at it and say, well, the theology is actually the simple bit. The difficult bit is making a whole way of life for a nation based upon principles that are meant to be absolute. And with the Jewish interpretation, which is the right way of doing it, which is what we hope all of humankind will recognize and be grateful for at the end of days, when the name of the Lord is one and he is one, okay? That this is the Or Lagoyim, the light unto the nations that the prophet Isaiah was talking about, I suppose, okay? So even if it's a little odd to us, if I press you and I say, well, do we really know what you shall not kill means? There are a lot of different ways of doing this, and to get it right isn't always easy. So I hope I have said enough at least to give you some type of answer, okay, to the excellent question. Jean.
If I understood, donc according to Rambam, the two first commandments were understood by the people, and the 8 later they heard a big noise, but they did not understand the contents.
That, I believe, is what Maimonides is saying.
It seems to be in contradiction with the text.
But he does say that even in relation to the first 2 commandments, the people may not have understood it at the level of Moshe. And that's why I cited Abarbanel, who says, what's going on here? I don't understand. And that's why I said at the very first talk I gave, I cited the Rambam himself, I am going to contradict myself. I'm going to give you bits and pieces of my theory in different parts of the Moreh Nevukhim. And you have to what, Yael? Connect the dots. So I'm leaving this with you as a Maimonidean move. It's not the only place in the Moreh Nevukhim where Abarbanel and Chasdai Kreskas, I mean, goes to town with these contradictions, okay? They're there all over, but this is what the Rambam warned us about. If you don't want contradictions, don't read my book, okay?
The text says, "Ata naman amud ki tochlenu ha'esh hagdola azot im yosfim anachnu lishmoa et kol Hashem."
Exactly.
That means that they didn't want to hear the call. Why did
the call came with the last 8, okay? And they didn't understand. They had no idea, and they were terrified because all they heard was a huge noise, okay? As I said, God can make a very loud noise. That's Moshe Daber v'Elohim yanenu b'kol, okay? So that's exactly what Rambam is saying. And you have to accept the fact that he's always going to leave you with a question mark. And he says so. And you have to decide where you're going to go with that. Did the people really understand those 2 first commandments at the same level of Moshe? Or did they not? What did the Rambam really believe? And remember, I told you at the beginning, I cannot possibly take you further than what the Rambam himself would have wanted to do. So I leave you with that question. Okay, any more? Then if it is a close...
Oh, sorry, Harvey. It's Harvey. I got a quick question.
Yeah, Harvey.
So how does Rambam deal with the angels in the story of Abraham and the 3 angels and Lot and Sodom and Amorah? How does he deal with all that? How does he explain that?
I am going to say a very quick answer. We're going to see in its popular form the answer next week in Hilchot Yesodei HaTorah, in the Mishnah Torah, where he gives the watered down version for popular consumption. They are not called angels, they are called men. 3 men appear to Abraham, and the men come to Sodom. Rambam says that all of these were in prophetic dreams or visions, okay? So I'm going to leave you with that for this evening, with a promise that next week we're going to spell this out a little more, but it's definitely not that Abraham or Lot were visited by these creatures in white gowns with halos and wands and flapping their wings and saying, I'm here to give you good news and to save you. Definitely not. Okay?
Sorry, I also have a question. But you said that the that Eshet Manoach,
Yeah.
this was not the Ish. This was something more.
It's called a malach.
It's called the Malach, and there was not just a one-way street. She really could speak with him. She could ask him questions. So why is this considered a low level kind of interaction?
Okay. Apparently, she did have an interaction with an angel. Of course, this would have had to take place in a prophetic dream. And the angel basically spoke to her from inside her head. Okay? This conversation took place inside her head, including the promise that you will have a son, and he will be whatever he will be, Pere Adam, Yado Bakol, V'Yad Kol Bo, okay? And as we said, also, V'Ifreti Oto Ma'od Ma'od. So there are different types of angels, angels you see in a vision. There are angels which are forces that are out there in the world, okay? And sometimes you can be at a very low level of understanding, but God can want you to grasp something. So he wanted Hagar to grasp the fact that Ishmael's life could be saved and she shouldn't despair. And so she has a vision in which she sees a malach, somebody or some voice as she has a conversation, and she saves her son. The mother of Shimshon, okay, is required to know that her son is going to be a savior of Israel, has to be brought up in a certain way. So, if you like, her whole maternal instinct then intersects with some kind of prophetic dream manifestation of a vision. Rambam will say, for example, that when Shimshon goes around the vineyard in the Elah Valley and he meets the lion and he overcomes the lion, it says, Va and the Ruach Elohim Pa'ambo, okay? Ruach Elohim, this is a kind of low spirit, and he has a vision too. The same thing with King David, who's able to overcome lions and bears, whether they were real lions and bears, whether this was a kind of vision he had. All of this is not clear when the Rambam starts to examine it. So I've given you the basis. Next week, we'll try and systematize this a little more, okay? But just begin to get the idea that it is not angels flying around, and that there is an angel is another word for the forces we have inside us, the forces in everything in nature. Sometimes these forces are harnessed by God for his plan, for the way the world is going to develop. Sometimes the angel is a force that appears to a person and gives them inspiration to do something, to attack lions and bears, to speak out, to look for water for the sick child and not to give up, and to understand that you have a special baby and you have to rear him in a certain way that's going to prepare him to save the entire house of Israel. But nothing is simple and, if you like, childish, as the Rambam would say, that the angel flew in, okay, and suddenly speaks to Hagar and opens her eyes. The well was always there. Hagar had to be fired up. She was about to give up. She needed prophetic inspiration. That was God's plan, because Ishmael has to come into being and he has to flourish. And therefore she gets this special impetus. The terms like malach, navi, shaliach, they all refer to capacities within human beings, okay? But the question is, at the intersection of those capacities and God's plan for the world. There is a little God's plan, which is will, but there's a huge amount of wisdom. The opposite school of thought, the Kalam and Yehuda Halevi and Saadia Gaon to a certain extent, are full of will with only a little bit of wisdom. And that's the difference between Maimonides and the other medieval Jewish philosophers, other than the extreme rationalists, such as Moshe Narboni. Okay? So that, I think, is a good point at which to say Gemar Chatima Tova to everybody. See you after Yom Kippur for a wrap-up session on prophecy, which I hope will also answer the questions that perhaps were not answered. After that, we'll take a break, because during Cholawet Sukkot, I'm not really available, and then we will hopefully continue. So all the best.
Thank you.
and have a tzom kal, have a great Shabbat Shuvah, listen to a wonderful drasha, and as I said, Gemar Chatima Tova to one and all.
Gemar
Bye.
Chatima Tova.
Come
Thank you. Thank you.
Tov.